All right, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast, where we're covering the Big East now for some team previews. If you are enjoying the content, please make sure to like and subscribe. We've appreciated all the support we've gotten so far. We're going to dive right into it. Start off with some offensive strengths here for Butler, and we will start with Cody here.
Yeah, I think their top strength, I would say there's like some versatility and three-level scoring ability at multiple positions. Starts with the perimeter group and Jalen Jackson, who's coming from Purdue Fort Wayne. Finley Bizjack, who was here last year, shot it really well. And Yane Butler coming from Drexel. I think they're all capable of operating on or off the ball. Jalen Jackson a little bit less so just because he doesn't shoot it all that well from three. But I do think he provides some other strong qualities on the ball that will allow him to translate. He's a bigger guard that can score at the rim. He's a solid playmaker as well. So I think he's going to be able to provide some value. Bizjack, he had a great year too for Butler. He shot at 42.8% from three on 4.1 attempts per game. And he showed some competence on the ball as well that we didn't really see as a freshman. So, and some deep range. So I do think Bizjack is a bit of an underrated player in this league. And it was good for Thad Matta to be able to retain a guy like him. And for Butler, I think ultimately he's more of a secondary action player, but he does have the ability to score at multiple levels, particularly in the mid-range on his dribble pull-up. And I also think there's some front court skill here with Michael Ajayi coming from Gonzaga, Drayton Jones coming from South Carolina State, and Johan Traore, who was, I believe he was a four-star originally. Where did he start his career again? I don't remember. No, he was at SMU last year, was at UC Santa Barbara.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's a guy that all three of those guys provide some front court skill, and I think Jackson particularly is going to have a solid pick and roll partner with either of those three guys that he chooses. So ultimately, I think they'll all be able to play off of one another to at least a competent level. This is kind of what Thad Matta always looks for, is like solid versatility of guys who can provide on and off the ball presences as shooters or as scorers at the rim.
Marcus, we'll toss it over to you and hear your strengths, maybe some weaknesses as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the strength is like there is some talent coming in, right? It's just a matter of like how well that gets put to use. I think there's some, like Cody said as well, there's some versatility coming in the front court that could be impactful. I'm a little bit like Jalen Jackson, like Cody mentioned, not great shooting from the perimeter. I think he has some, like Cody said, some playmaking ability, and can score it at the rim. So I think there are like pieces of each player in this offense that can fit together. It's just a matter of whether or not they actually make all the puzzle pieces fit. I'm not so sure. And this Butler team isn't exactly like projected to finish very well in the Big East. But I do think like this offense has some pieces that have been successful elsewhere that could fit together if Thad Matta is able to pull the strings correctly. Yeah, but there are obviously some weaknesses. Like I said, like this Butler team isn't expected to finish very highly here. I think they really lack a true go-to scorer. When I look at their roster, there's nobody that I'm like, oh yeah, like he's going to be able to go get us a bucket at the end of a game. I think that's a big concern in the Big East in particular, where games can turn pretty physical against some of these teams, and the road games can be tough, and they can be low scoring, kind of grinded out games, and you need a guy that can either go get you a bucket or get to the foul line and create some points that way. I'm not overly high on the floor spacing. Obviously, Cody, you mentioned Bizjack shot over 40%. He's obviously great there. Yane Butler, right, 37% last year. But outside of him, like Jalen Jackson, I already mentioned, pretty much a non-shooter, 27 for 103 last year. A guy like Jamie Kaiser, 30 for 113 last year, 26% himself. Ajayi is not a shooter. Xavier Robinson, the freshman coming in, he seems like a pretty rim reliant guard. Going to live much more in transition. It seems like, and generate some offense from defense. And I also just have some concerns with ball control. I think like, are they going to be able to take care of the basketball? Jalen Jackson, of course, coming up a level, he took care of the ball, quite well at Purdue Fort Wayne. 13% turnover rate, and actually only a 7% turnover rate in two top 50 games. But now coming to the Big East against, there are going to be some really good defensive teams in this league. Can they take care of the basketball, especially where they don't have a guy that they can just give the ball to go get him a bucket? So I do have some concerns with this offense, but like I said, there are some pieces that could fit in quite nicely.
Cody, any concerns you want to add about Butler's offense?
Yeah, my number one concern was the floor spacing relative to where it was last season. I mean, this was an offense that was built off of their floor spacing with guys like Patrick McCaffrey, Pierre Brooks, Jamal Telfer on the wings to kind of space everything out for one another. And they were all able to play off of one another fairly well, which I still think they're going to be able to do that to an extent. But when you have some non-shooters on this roster, like Marcus mentioned, and Jalen Jackson, Michael Ajayi shot at 18%, Drayton Jones or Johan Traore, they don't really provide any floor spacing at the 5, which they actually had that element a little bit last year with when Bowden Kapke was coming off the bench, but now they really don't have any of that. So like the floor is going to be a little bit less. There's going to be a little bit less of driving lanes for this group this season. That would be really helpful for a guy like Jackson to be surrounded by at least 3 or 4 shooters. And I believe that's a little bit of a concern. I do think they're going to be a little bit better than, like Marcus mentioned, with a guy to like go downhill and get you a bucket late in games. Like I do think they have some guys that you can put the ball in their hands and they can actually go get you a bucket in multiple areas, like I mentioned, like as a strength. But I just ultimately throughout the course of a game, I do think floor spacing is a pretty big issue. And when you're not spacing the floor, that eliminates your ability to get to the rim. Thad Matta's teams typically don't harp getting on the offensive glass. I don't really think he's had any, besides like his Ohio State teams, like way back in the day. Like he doesn't have any teams that have been able to get on the glass consistently. Jones and Traore are fine, but I don't really think they're needle moving. So I do think for an offense that is typically predicated off of spacing, I do think they're lacking in that area, which could bring up some concerns like midseason.
Let's talk about the other side of the ball now, defensively. What strengths do you see for this Butler Bulldog team? Marcus, we'll go with you here.
Yeah, I mean, I like the front court, right? I think guys like Traore, Drayton Jones, who last year had an 8.1% block rate, was solid on the defensive glass. I think Ajayi, has some positional versatility. So I think the front court should be the strength of this defense. I do think there's some rim protection in a guy like Drayton Jones. I know like Traore, his block rate isn't the best, and for his career, it's only at 1.4%. But he's 6'11", can kind of impact with his length and size. So I think like the overall strength of this defense is going to be like the length and athleticism of the front court.
Cody, what do you see for strengths in this defense?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of more on the flip side with the center rotation. I'm not in love with the rim anchors. I'll mention that in a minute, but I think just as a group, I think their positional size and their rebounding are real strengths. And like Jalen Jackson, Bizjack's probably the weak link, and then you have guys like Butler, Michael Ajayi, and Jamie Kaiser. I think they're all interchangeable on the wings, and they can also all help on the glass. And I think Jalen Jackson and Ajayi are probably the two best defenders from this group. And I think these two guys would have been the top two defenders on last year's roster. I think last year's roster was really lacking that lateral quickness on the wings. And I think these guys, like particularly Ajayi, like I think he can guard realistically, like maybe not ones, but I think he can guard 2 through 5 with actual competence. He's going to be stronger guarding 3s and 4s, but I do think he has real versatility. And Jackson is a wide framed 6'2" guard that he's going to hold his ground against any guard in the power conference ranks. So, I mean, Jones and Traore, like they're big bodies who are going to be able to get on the glass and help out, which I think is where they're going to provide the most value. Butler finished 132nd nationally in defensive rebounding last year, and I do see that number improving with the bigger wings and just more active rebounding wings, like Ajayi had a 26% defensive rebound rate. And I mentioned, I think their point of attack defense is going to be much better than last year. Then one final strength is Thad Matta teams never foul. He emphasizes this year in and year out. His defense has been top 10 nationally in free throw rate allowed in all 3 years at Butler. And since 2008, where like the actual numbers are tracked on Torvik, he's never ranked outside of the top 50 nationally in free throw rate allowed, which is a pretty crazy stat. He's finished as the number 1, I believe, 3 times, and he's finished top 10 6 or 7 times in this area. And like, there's 364 teams in the country, and to finish top 10 that many times is like, this is a true point of emphasis. Like, his teams are not going to foul. So I don't really think there's going to be foul trouble concerns with the front court or really anybody on the roster. So I guess that's another positive.
That's a pretty cool stat, actually. I didn't realize that. But let's talk concerns now defensively, and Marcus, we'll go back to you. But what are you concerned about with this Butler defense?
Yeah, I think my biggest concern is really just like the depth, I guess, overall. Right now they've got, I think, 7 guys that can play for sure. And then I mentioned like Xavier Robinson, who's a freshman. He's projected to be like in their top 8. And then, 9 and 10 are also projected freshmen. So I think just some uncertainty there, especially with, you figure like Traore and Drayton Jones are going to split minutes. Ajayi kind of slated in at the 4. There's not really another, I guess, like maybe Butler can play bigger if they want to go smaller. But I just worry, I guess, a little bit about the depth early on in the year. So I guess that would be my biggest concern is, if you mentioned like fouling is not an issue in Thad Matta teams, but it definitely, if it does come about or injuries come about, it definitely could pose troubles for this team with their lack of depth.
Cody, what's concerning for you defensively?
Yeah, I'm not all that high on Drayton Jones or Traore, like as rim anchors, just as defensive talents, I guess. I know Jones was solid and he has the size and length to be like competent at the Big East level, but we don't know exactly what we're going to end up getting from him. He's coming from the MEAC, which is like, it's known as one of the worst leagues in the country. So it's just hard to project his 8.1% block rate last season. And I think there's going to be a learning curve for him at this level, just because like he is a guy that fouled a ton. And I think he's going to have to completely change his style. I think a lot of his blocks came from weak side rim protection. And this is a defense that really emphasizes being strong positionally and not really gambling as often. This isn't a defense that forces a high rate of turnover. So he's going to have to play more within himself, which I'm not completely sure he's ready for right now. I mean, 5.7 fouls per 40 throughout his career doesn't necessarily make him reliable. And then when he has to change the way he plays in a Matta scheme, which at this point with Matta's track record, he's absolutely going to have to. I think it makes him kind of a shell of himself on the defensive side. So, and I'm also not that high on Traore. He has a 3-year sample size of being like a rather poor rim anchor, and like he had a 1.4% career block rate. That's not everything as a rim anchor. I'm a little bit concerned with his ability to get on the defensive glass as well and his overall activity. And maybe if he's splitting minutes with Jones, he can have a little more success and be able to play with more energy throughout that 15 to 20 minutes. But overall, I'm not all that sold on him as a defensive talent. And for a Matta scheme, for like they play a ton of drop coverage, they filter a lot of their defense into the bigs. If there's concerns with the rim protection, there's concerns with this entire defense. And it was a concern last season. I mean, they had Andre Screen on the back line, who would probably be the best rim protector on this roster. I mean, I think just him as a rim deterrent, I think is more of a sure thing than what they're getting on this year's roster. But for a defense that finished 176th nationally, and we have the same kind of concerns this coming season with the rim protection, I think it's fair to say that they didn't improve all that much, even though the point of attack defense improved with guys like Jalen Jackson and Michael Ajayi.
We'll move right along here. Who's your MVP and X Factor, Marcus?
Yeah, MVP. I went with Finley Bizjack. I think he showed enough last year as a guy. He averaged 10 points a game, shot it really well. I think he has some ability, as Cody mentioned earlier, to put the ball on the floor. I think he should be probably the MVP, at least in my eyes. But I think this team isn't good enough where I'd be like no way to another guy. I just think he probably has a solid chance of taking a pretty big jump in scoring. The opportunity is going to be there, and he's their best shooter for sure. And then X Factor, I went with Jalen Jackson. Actually, I think just if he can be a little bit better as a shooter, but then again, his ability to take care of the ball, what we saw at Purdue Fort Wayne last year, and also his assist rate I think was right around 21%. So if he can create some plays for others, maybe make life a little bit easier for a guy like Bizjack to get some open catch and shoot threes, and then if he can continue to get downhill, get to the rim and score, that'll be a huge boost for this Butler offense. So ultimately, that's why I went there with him for the X Factor.
Cody, are you in agreement, or do you have different guys in mind for MVP and X Factor?
I did take a different route. I went with Marcus's X Factor as my MVP with Jalen Jackson. I think if there's one like rim reliant mid-major guard that can come up and translate his abilities, I do think it's Jalen Jackson. I mean, outside of like Donovan Dent, obviously, like he's coming from the Mountain West. I don't really consider that much of a mid-major, but I think Jalen Jackson's size as a 6'2" guard, and I mean, he just has real strength when it comes to getting to the rim. He never gets really knocked off his spots unless he's dealing with like true big men up front. So I do think he's a size like mismatch issue for even guards in the Big East. So I do think his ability to get downhill, play in transition, score at the rim, and his playmaking ability is pretty underrated as well. I ultimately think he's going to have to be an important creator for these shooters on this offense for this Butler offense to reach its ceiling. For my X Factor, I went with Michael Ajayi. I think his defense, his point of attack defense, and his ability to protect the rim a little bit as well, I think is going to be really important, just since I have some issues with the 5 position right now. And I do think he can be somewhat of a connector on the offensive end, like outside of his shooting. I think he's a guy that you can put the ball in his hands and he can make decisions at times. We saw him do it at Pepperdine, I believe. Was he at Pepperdine? Or
Yeah.
I believe it was a school in the WCC, but he had a lot of on-ball responsibility there, and he had some success. So I do think he's able to have the ball in his hands at times and relieve some pressure off of Jackson.
What's the ceiling and floor for this Butler team? And we'll throw in a bold prediction too at the tail end of that.
I think it's a pretty narrow ceiling and floor here. I'm not overly high on this team. I just think there's there's just clear issues, and they don't really have like the top level talent that a team needs to finish like at the top of the Big East. So ultimately, like they're projected, I think, to finish 10th in this conference. I have them anywhere from like 8 to 11. I think maybe we could see a 7, but I don't really see much more than that, and I don't really envision any postseason games for the Butler Bulldogs, unless like I don't know, did they play in that tournament out in Vegas? I forget. Everyone played in that tournament, I feel like. So
I think they did actually. If I remember.
I don't remember. I didn't pay a look of attention to that tournament anyway.
But my bold prediction here, I'm not sure if it will be like by way of firing or just like Thad Matta getting done altogether, but I think like this could be the end of his second tenure at Butler. 3 seasons of pretty like mediocre basketball, like right either under 500 or just over. I believe last year they were 18 and 16 or whatever. The year before that they were a few games under 500. This year I expect pretty much the same. I think that it just might be time for a change in scenery for Butler, who, they're now they're 15 years removed from back-to-back national championships or back-to-back Final Four appearance national championships, right? So, they obviously want to get back to some sort of winning, right? And, continuing to kind of live in the middle and just be a mediocre team. I can't imagine it's something that the Bulldogs are going to be content with for too much longer.
Cody, where's your ceiling and floor for Butler here, and in your bold prediction as well?
Yeah, I'll actually start with my bold prediction because it's the same exact thing. I said that Matta and Butler might mutually agree to part ways. So we had it kind of exactly the same, which is rather interesting. I mean, I have it listed as he gets fired, but I think it's going to be more of a mutual agreement. I just think the way he constructs rosters is like he wants to have two-way players, like high-level two-way players across his rosters. Like his best teams at Ohio State were just great across the board, offensively and defensively. Like he had a ton of wings that were interchangeable. Like he's trying to do the same things here. He just doesn't have the budget of like an Ohio State, like what he had back then. Like they obviously didn't have like actual like money to give out back then, but I just think they're a step behind in resources. And when you're trying to construct a roster in that way, I don't think it creates much of a ceiling. It actually creates a lower floor as well, because you're getting a lot of tweeners that actually aren't really that great on either side of the ball. And I think that's kind of what we have here, sadly. I put their ceiling as fifth in the Big East because I'm really not that high on the middle of the pack of this conference at all. So I do think finishing in fifth and still missing the tournament is within the range of outcomes for Butler. And ultimately, my floor, I had them bottom 2 because that's where they're projected right now. And I would say it's most likely they finish from that 8 to 11 range, like Marcus mentioned. Well, maybe not 11. There's a team that's like specially made for that 11 spot that we'll talk about later. 8 to 10. We'll say 8 to 10 because I don't want to put Thad Matta down there at the bottom. So, but yeah, there's a wide range of outcomes in this league, but I think ultimately they're sitting in like the 50 to 95 range in Ken Palm or Torvik, wherever you look for your ratings. So, but I don't think there's a postseason involved in even at their ceiling.
All right. Well, that'll wrap up this episode of Mainly Hoops. And as always, thank you for listening to the Mainly Hoops podcast.